Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the India-ASEAN Textiles Weaving Relationships Show. Looking back at the history of humanity, there is a kaleidoscope of change that stares back at us. History is replete with sagas of political domination, with empires rising and crumbling, people warring and settling, and human migrations forever changing the stories of land, ancient and new. Creation, obliteration, and recreation of nations and borders are constant. Especially in the traditional lands of Asia, this rings even truer. Yet, across the borders that have been defined and redefined, we find traditional mores, religious customs, cultural motives, and spirituality permeating and spreading through expansion of kingdoms, intermingling of people, and the ubiquitous routes of trade and commerce. In the case of India and the ASEAN countries, these relationships are even better, bound through geographic contiguity, trade relationships, and traditional and religious proximity that have existed through the eons. With the spread of political and commercial influence, the influence of religion, tradition, and culture also spread and intermingled with local traditions, creating a multifarious set of interconnected yet unique customs. This is most visible in textiles and handicrafts, which by their very nature tend to be intertwined with religion and culture. This extension of textiles and weaving fulfills the basic necessity of clothing and, where is most evident, the interconnectivities of design and craft. Technique and fabric so similar, yet so incredibly distinctive. Textiles follow a common thread across the region. The use of weaving techniques, whether ikat or batik or others, the commonality of fabrics like cotton and silk, the designs imitating surrounding nature and religious symbolisms, and also usage of occasions of enormous personal and social import are all common across our cultures. It is to celebrate this commonality of roots in the midst of diverse tapestry of our cultures that binds all of our societies in embrace of familiarity that we present this collection of contemporary garments by India and ASEAN countries. ASEAN designers have interpreted for the Indian market and Indian designers for ASEAN customers. From handlooms to power looms to elaborate machines, all three levels of technology are finding a place in the textile industry of India and ASEAN. Students from India's premier fashion technology school, the National Institute of Fashion Technology in New Delhi, have utilized their student resources, with each group of students interpreting for an ASEAN country. Many ASEAN countries have similarly brought about their designers and the garments they've created for India. Both the Indian and ASEAN-inspired garments would be displayed on this stage today. Ladies and gentlemen, whilst we were doing the research for textiles through ASEAN and India, we found commonalities not only in textiles and weaves, but also in our music. Today we bring to you music from ASEAN and Indian states. So today you might hear drums from ASEAN with the drums of Northeast. You'll hear baul music from Bengal with Vietnamese flute music. You'll hear music from Singapore with fisherfolk music from South India. So that is where we are going today. You're going to hear a story, the story of ASEAN and India together today on the world stage. The first segment is the history of the Saree, and I'll just take you a few slides of the Saree. Modesty has had different definitions over time and in different regions and communities. It was not always about covering your face and body, and in many respects, India's hot climate led the way. People just did what was convenient. People wore rectangular pieces of fabric one on the lower part and one on the upper part of the body, little else. But the regional variations are interesting. In southern India, even in colonial times, some women did cover the upper part of their body. And throughout India's history of contact with different cultures, with Greek, Roman, Arab, and Chinese influences coming in, fashions and ideas began to change. In Bengal, in the Victorian era, some women did not wear blouses under their saris, and they did not suit Victorian society, which had its own ideas of propriety, and blouses increasingly became the norm. The term blouse and petticoat, both English, made the leap into Indian vocabulary in the Victorian era. The sari is one of the world's oldest and perhaps the only surviving unstitched garment from the past. Over the millennia, it has not only become a sensuous, glamorous, all-time wear for women, but also the canvas for weavers and printers to create artistic weaves, prints, and jeweled embellishments. In the Indian epics, which were written much after the Indus Valley period, several assorted items of dress were described. The Kanchuki, mentioned in many of the legends which form the narrative of the epics, was a piece of cloth worn across by women. It was probably the earliest form of the choli. Many women featuring in the classical literature generated by the epics were described as beautiful in clothes made from silks encrusted with gold and gems. In spite of these advancements, the sari and choli evolved very slowly through the ages. Its final form, as seen today, came about only in the Mughal period, when women's garments went through another major evolution. All through Indian literature, women were described as resplendently beautiful when wearing fabrics of extraordinary beauty woven out of silk, cotton, and other natural fibers. Soon, each weave and garment began to acquire specific names. Fabrics were specially woven for auspicious and religious ceremonies, and these too acquired generic names such as pitambar. In fact, historic records say that these silks and muslins were also highly prized all over the world. Several names were given to these fabrics depending upon their origin of texture. For example, koshia has a silk made from the finest cocoons. Chinnavastra was a fabric akin to Chinese silk. Tasara, today's Tassa silk, was made from using a particular kind of shuttle. The Mughals wore brocades of such exquisite quality that throughout the world this fabric came to be described as kinkwab or golden dream. The Europeans who imported this fabric turned the name into kinkob. To this day, brocade is known by this name in many European languages. The weavers and designers of India were the masters of their craft for many centuries. Nimble-fingered and ever alert to new concepts, they created a treasure house of ideas which continue to support and inspire millions of weavers in India even today. Indisputably, the greatest heritage these weavers gave to the Indian woman was the sari. They created such a vast variety that if a woman wore a different sari each day, the weaves, the prints, and designs would tally up to more than the days of her entire lifespan. Very often, the sari a woman would wear would be an exclusive, one-of-a-kind creation made from the most humble, rough, woven cotton to the finest handcrafted silk tissue spiked with soft gold threads. This relatively small length of fabric has since then become the canvas upon which every imaginable kind of creative experiment has made way of weaving, printing, embroidery, applique, and gold, silver, and precious stonework. Through centuries have passed since the sari was conceived as the Indian woman's hereditary costume, the chasm and this charm of this beautiful, extraordinary feminine garment, suited to the youngest of girls to the most elderly amongst women, has not waned. In fact, even with each new decade of technological progress, it has been well accepted by even the most modern women of the subcontinent. Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard chants from the Tibetan monasteries of the Asean with temple music of the hills of India. We bring to you the Saree segment.